to tie up the smallmouth version of the fly called the It's a Bug. I did the It's a Bug a number of years ago, the panfish version, and I mentioned the smallmouth version in it. It just so happened that I happened to be in a situation where I needed to tie some up for myself, and so I tied up a bunch of the panfish versions and the smallmouth versions and decided I would do a quick video on the smallmouth version. It's essentially the same as the panfish version. It's bigger, on a bigger hook, and I've got some tailing material in it. That's it. Otherwise, you take this out, it looks the same as the regular panfish version. This one is a Chartreuse in black, which is a very good color, and I'll talk more about the different color variations as we tie the fly. This is using a mop chenille for the body, but just a large rayon chenille will work well. You can vary the colors of all the foam and legs and everything up on this. Come up with some unique ideas for the smallmouth It's a Bug. I'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to start the It's a Bug, the smallmouth version, by placing my hook in the vise. This is a Mustad 3366 in a size 4. You go ahead and T-barb the hook. For thread on this, I'm using a UTC 140 Denier in black. You'll need a little bit heavier thread. You could use a monocord or even a 210 Denier. You want something a little heavier, and the reason is you'll see when I tie in the foam, if it's a 70 Denier or let's say a 6/0 or something like that, it can easily cut through the foam if you're not careful. So I'm going to attach my thread just in front of the point of the hook, and I'm going to advance my thread down. I actually want to go down the bend of the hook just a little bit past the barb, back up to just over the barb. This is going to give me a little bit of a base of thread for the tail. The tail and the legs on the It's a Bug are just round rubber legs, medium round rubber legs. As I mentioned, this is the smallmouth version, and the only difference between this and the panfish version is that I do put a tail on this. I get 6 pieces, 6 strands of the rubber legs for the tail. You could do 7 or you could do 5, it's up to you. And it's the size of the fly. The panfish version is a little bit smaller. Smallmouth version's obviously just a little bit bigger. So I'm going to wrap those in and then wrap down the hook shank to just past, maybe half an eye length past the barb. It's going to extend the body just a little bit, and it gets the tail kind of sticking out. Not sticking up and out, which if you just end it here, it would. It's down a little bit more. Then I'm going to wrap forward to about halfway up the hook shank, and then I'm going to wrap back about an eye length, and I'll explain why in just a second. For the body on this, you're using some 2mm foam. It's 2 different colors for this. I'm using the black and I'm using the Chartreuse. The black is basically going to be the back of the fly. Here's a orange one. You can see the back of it's going to be, the black is going to be the back of the fly, and the brighter colored, the Chartreuse, will be up at the head. You want these to be about a gap wide, the gap of the hook. Now, the reason why I didn't leave my thread hanging here is I want the foam to go about halfway down the shank, and then I'm going to fold it around the hook shank and start to wrap it in. If my thread were right here, the problem that I run into is I'm right off the end of the foam, so my wraps aren't actually going over foam. I have to reach down this way and get over the foam. It's much easier if you just go back down the hook shank a few wraps. Now when I wrap this around, my thread automatically is right around that foam, and those first few wraps just go in nice and easy. Here's where I also mentioned that you need to have the bigger diameter thread. You could, even with this 140, If I wrapped around here and really cranked down on that, I could easily cut through the foam. When you're wrapping foam bodies in like this, a lot of times you want to be kind of loose as you wrap in. I work my way down to the tail, and then I come back up and I wrap some more in, not super tight, but what I'll do is I'll work my way back and forth. The initial thread wraps will be under the tighter wraps and will help to compress the foam down along the hook shank. If you don't compress it enough, then the body can rotate on the hook shank while you're fishing it. So that's one thing you want to do. Just keep going back and forth. You'll notice it gets nice and even, but that is compressed really, really well along the hook shank. If I needed to, I could scoot this around if the body was, say, pulled over to the other side a little bit, so you still can move it. But that is nice and secure, so when you're fishing this, that's not going to move around. I'll end with my thread back down at the end of the body, and that's where I'm going to actually tie in the body material. For that, you can use a large chenille if you want. I'm using a black chenille, but this is a mop chenille. You've seen the mop flies that have gotten popular in the last few years. Well, I don't know which company makes it. I know Wapsi distributes it, but they have a mop chenille, and I like it. It's if you can get a nice large nylon chenille, it's a bit rounder than the rayon. The rayon can tend to kind of lay flat, so this is just a little bit rounder. The interesting thing about this, it doesn't have a core like your regular chenilles. All of these materials and whatever core is down there is all wrapped in and woven together. So if you think you have to pull a little of this out to expose the core and tie it in, what you run into is you actually start unraveling the whole chenille. Let's see if I can get it to do its thing here. Of course, now it's not doing it. Yep. But a lot of times this whole piece here, it's raveled together. So if you're, and of course it's not doing it. If it is unraveling on you, just cut it back, and then it compresses very easily. So just add it up on the hook shank, wrap that in going forward, and just wrap it down. As you can see, it compresses real easy. Plus, when you wrap this in with the rest of the body and everything, it's just a nice meaty looking bug, and that works just fine. I'm going to wrap my thread forward, not quite to the eye of the hook. You can crowd the eye and make it so that it's tough to actually tie that onto your leader if you're not careful. This is where I'll take the Chartreuse. I'm going to match this halfway down the hook shank here, and then I'm going to fold it around and start tying it in. That's why I put my thread up here near the eye of the hook and not halfway down. I can't hold on to the foam here and then wrap my thread if my thread's down here. But by having it up by the eye here, I can hold on to the thread and then slowly start wrapping in. Again, not really pulling tight, just gripping it, compressing it a little bit, and work my way down to the end of that foam and get those wraps in tighter and tighter. Get it nice and compressed along the hook shank. I'll end with my thread right in the middle of the hook shank. Now you'll notice that this has twisted the foam to the far side of the hook. All I have to do is pinch that and twist it right back up. I want to make certain that I have a little bit of space behind the eye of the hook there, and I'll show you that in just a second. Now my thread is in place for tying in the legs on the It's a Bug. Same strip of rubber. The rubber legs here, by the way, for this size hook, for the legs themselves, I cut a ribbon off, and I cut a length about 2 inches. I like the legs a little bit longer. For the tail, I cut about 1.5 inches, 1.75 inches, and I'll show you how we'll size the tail in just a little bit. For the video here, the tail's a little bit longer, but it doesn't matter. I'll show you how we'll size that. But I did want to make certain that my legs are about 2 inches. You can trim those a little shorter. Obviously, you can do those longer if you want them to even be longer. I'm going to take 2 of them, and at about the 1/3 spot, I'm going to tie those onto the hook shank right in the middle of the hook shank. I choose the 1/3 because I like a little bit shorter legs in the front than in the back. You can have them the exact same length if you want. I don't think it matters. That's more just my aesthetic view of the fly. Take the other set and tie those in the same. I want to make certain that the front and back legs are about the same length. Again, they don't have to be, spot on. I'll get 3 or 4 wraps on there, kind of position those, fold the fronts back, advance my thread to almost, not quite, maybe just a millimeter, 32nd of an inch behind the foam there. Now I'll take the mop chenille, I'll bring it around. I'm bracing the body here on the hook because I'm kind of giving that chenille just a little bit of a tight tug right there. And then I'm just going to wrap each wrap in front of the other one. I usually get 3 wraps in back, 1 wrap right across the middle, and 2 to 3 wraps in front. This one I'm getting 2, and that's primarily because I don't want this wrap of foam or chenille to push right up against those legs, because then the legs will stick out more perpendicular than forward. I'll wrap that in, secure that with my thread, and I'll trim away the excess. Now here at this point, if you're starting to crowd the eye of the hook here, you can take your thumbnail, push it right along that hook shank, and just kind of scooch all of that down just a little bit. You want to make certain that the eye is all showing. If this is all pinched up around the eye afterward like this, it's going to make it tough to tie onto your leader. So we want to kind of keep that in mind. Make certain my legs are on the sides of the body right here. I'll take the black foam, fold it over, pulling on that just a little so it's nice and smooth, and then I'll put in 4 or 5 wraps, 6 wraps to secure that. Bring my scissors underneath the foam, and I'm going to clip that foam generally just out in front of the eye of the hook, maybe about 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little bit more, 3/16, something like that. If it's a little bit longer or a little bit shorter, I would go a little bit longer than I would shorter. That's up to you. Experiment a little bit with it. But then we're going to take the Chartreuse foam and we're going to fold it over and around. So it's going to make that head a little bit bigger, a little bit more pronounced. Take my thread, come around. Again, I'm not pulling super hard because I can cut through that foam. What I am doing is adding in tighter and tighter wraps, and I put in about 4 or 5 there to secure that. Then I can cut this foam, and I generally will cut this portion here about the same length as the head or a little bit longer. If you want it to be longer, you certainly you can, but that's just my preference. So I cut the wing case, if that's what you would call it, to be about the same length as the head out front. That's just me. I will put in a 4 or 5 turn whip finish. And cut away my thread. Here I'll position the legs if I have to, pop the ends of those rubber legs to separate them if they're not already separated. Now the tail, as I mentioned, what you can do with the tail is if you want it generally I go about the length of the body, maybe a little bit longer. Just bring it right over the body like this, and you can cut that right to the length of the body or a little bit longer if you want. Like I said, I like a little bit longer. It's up to you. Like I said, the original It's a Bug did not have a tail on it. Years ago, I went ahead and made this into what I call the smallmouth version, just by putting in the tail material and making it a little bit bigger. It's been a really, really good fly for me. Again, if the eye is a little bit crowded right there, you can still take your thumb, kind of push on that, scooch it back. You just want to make certain that that eye is easy to push back and get to so you can get your leader in through it. So head cement, you can be generous with your head cement right along those wraps and even across the back right there. When you put the head cement across the back, you might open that up just a little bit so that it'll get down into the threads and it won't just dry and crust up right there on top. So that is the smallmouth version of It's a Bug. You can certainly use different materials on these. I tied some. These are actually even tied on a larger hook. These are on a, see if I can get this held up so you can see it a little bit better. This one is on a Mustad 3366 hook, but a number 2. So it's, as you can see, it's a larger size. Again, going for bigger fish, that's all. But I used black legs on this. Otherwise, it's all the same material. You could use silly legs on them if you want. You could use, barred rubber legs, anything like that that you wanted to. And this one is the same thing with the black legs, but I'm using Estaz for the underbody on that. That's just a standard Estaz. Chartreuse. This one is the same with white legs. And again, the Estaz underbody. I've known people who have tied this with a dubbed body, and then they'll palmer a hackle along the whole body underneath here instead of the rubber legs. You could put in another set of rubber legs on this if you want to. I mean, there's all kinds of different things you can do. I find that the different colored heads on these, I don't think whether they're orange or in this case, here's a blue one. I don't think that those make a big difference for the fish. I do think that they make a big difference for the fishermen. In other words, the orange is going to show up real well in low light, maybe in the evening. Yellow also shows up real well. A white's not going to show up all that great. And in the bright day, chartreuse maybe. I've tied a bunch of these in different colors, red even, and they all seem to work well. I haven't found a color that worked better than another one. Again, it's more this color of the head. It's easier for me to see. And that does make a difference at different times of day under different lighting situations. So that's the smallmouth version of It's a Bug. I do have the chartreuse in yellow as well as the orange and blue for sale on the website. The regular It's a Bug panfish version, also in those colors, is available on the website. But get you some craft foam and some rubber legs and have some fun. Tie some up and get out on your pond. I don't know about trout. I don't see why this would not, if trout are keyed on terrestrials, I don't see why this would not work for trout, or at least the panfish version, which is a little bit smaller. It's kind of like an ant or a beetle or something like that, so I would think it would work. But I know that this works great for panfish and for smallmouth. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for joining me at Devise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern
If not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.